The silence was always the worst part. The waiting. It was a sterile, perfect silence, recycled and scrubbed until it was as lifeless as the void outside the viewport. On the bridge of the Vespertine, it felt heavier than armor, a pressure that squeezed the air from your lungs and left only the cold tang of ozone and dread. I stood at the command rostrum, my reflection a pale ghost in the polished obsidian floor, watching the target bloom in the holographic tank. Xylos, a world of impossible blues and greens, a vibrant jewel hanging in the blackness, swaddled in clouds of soft, pearlescent vapor. To the casual eye, it was paradise. To the instruments of the Vespertine, it was a canvas. And we were here to paint it in the color of death. My crew, if you could call them that, moved with a noiseless efficiency that was more unnerving than any military drill. They weren't soldiers. They were ghosts. Like me, Dr. Lena Petrova, once the foremost astrophysicist of her generation, now tracked orbital mechanics for optimal dispersal patterns, her gaze as cold and distant as the nebulae she used to study. Elias Vance, my former mentor, a man who had taught me the sanctity of the genetic code, sat at the weapons console, his gnarled fingers hovering over the sequence that would unleash an apocalypse of his own design. We were the best minds humanity had to offer, the poets and builders and dreamers, and we had all been repurposed into a single, elegant weapon of vengeance. The countdown clock on the main screen ticked downward, each numeral a drop of blood. 30 zerts, 29:59. My hand rested on the cool metal of the rostrum, the ship's faint vibrations a familiar tremor under my palm. It had not always been the Vespertine. I remembered her christening, the bright champagne bottle shattering against a hull painted hopeful white. She was the Stella Seeker then, a vessel of discovery, our finest creation, destined to carry us to new suns, to make first contact. We had made contact. All right. They called themselves the Chorus, and they arrived not in warships, but in vessels that looked like spun starlight, elegant and silent. They didn't land. They simply appeared in our skies, a silent, shimmering choir. Their voices entered our minds not as words, but as pure comprehension, a symphony of logic and serenity that bypassed the crude mechanics of language. They offered us a gift, the Eleutheria, a panacea delivered through a gentle, airborne phage that swept across the globe in a single, breathless week. It was a miracle. Cancers vanished. Genetic disorders corrected themselves. Old age seemed to recede like a tide. For a year, humanity celebrated a golden age, a gift from the heavens delivered by our silent, benevolent guardians. I was there, at the forefront of the xenobiology division, working to understand the Eleutheria's divine mechanics. I remember the day the truth began to dawn, sitting in a sterile lab, staring at fertility charts from across the globe. The lines were all pointing the same way down, sharply, impossibly down. At first, we thought it was a statistical anomaly, a side effect we could correct. We were scientists. We believed every problem had a solution, but the birth rates kept falling, from a trickle to a drought, until they hit zero. Not a single confirmed human pregnancy. Anywhere. Earth and its colonies, a population of 12 billion souls, had been rendered completely, irrevocably sterile. The silence that followed that realization was 1,000 times heavier than the one on my bridge now. It was a planetary silence, A species-wide intake of breath before a scream that never came. Instead, the chorus spoke to us again, their collective thought a calm, rational melody in our minds. Your aggressive expansion was a threat to cosmic harmony, they explained, their tone devoid of malice, filled only with a terrible, paternalistic pity. Your potential for chaos was limitless. We could not allow a fire to consume the garden. We have not killed you. We have simply ended you. Your generation will be the last. Live out your long lives in peace. Your story is over. It is a kindness, a gentle, quiet genocide, administered with a smile and a song. They hadn't declared war. They had written our epilogue. The rage that followed was not loud. It was cold, silent, and absolute. Governments didn't fall, they merged. Corporations didn't compete, they collaborated. Every factory, every lab, every mind on every world turned to a single, unifying purpose. We would not live out our long lives in peace. We would spend them burning down their garden. We would teach the chorus what a fire truly was. And so, the Stella Seeker was brought into a hidden dry dock. Her white hull stripped and repainted the color of a starless midnight. Her sensor arrays were repurposed to track biological signatures. Her labs transformed into viral incubators. She became the Vespertine, the evening prayer, the twilight of a species. And I, Dr. Eris Thorne, the xenobiologist who had so eagerly welcomed our destroyers, was given her command. My guilt was my qualification. My intimate knowledge of their biology was my sword. Elias had found me in the wreckage of my lab, surrounded by smashed equipment and the useless, mocking fertility data. They took our future, Eris, he had said, his voice a low rasp. They took our children, the ones we have, and all the ones that would have been. We are a race of ghosts now. All we can do is haunt them. So we learned to haunt. We took his genius for genetics and my understanding of the chorus's alien physiology, and we twisted them into something monstrous. We didn't build bombs. Bombs were too loud, too crude. They were an answer to a question the chorus hadn't asked. We designed plagues, tailored retroviruses. We weaponized their own biology against them, turning their unique cellular structure, their serene hive mind, into a vulnerability. Our first weapon was codenamed the Unraveling. It was a virus that didn't kill with fever or lesion. It simply erased. It contained a sequence that, upon entering a chorus life form, would systematically dismantle its genetic code, turning it back into a soupy, primordial broth. It was Elias's masterpiece of spite. They unmade our future, he'd said, a grim smile on his thin lips. We will unmake their present. Our target, Xylos, was what their hive mind considered a nursery. It was not a world of cities and armies, but a planet-sized creche where the chorus cultivated and guided the evolution of millions of nascent biological forms, their equivalent of children. They did not reproduce as we did. They sculpted life itself, guiding it, nurturing it. Xylos was their Garden of Eden, their cradle. We were going to turn it into a cemetery. 10 minutes to optimal injection point, Petrova announced, her voice flat. Dispersal vectors are locked. The atmospheric currents are stable. Elias, I said, my voice feeling strange and distant in my own ears. Final calibration. He nodded, not looking up from his console. The phage is primed and eager. Aris, it smells dinner. His gallows humor was a shield we all used, a thin blanket against the crushing cold of what we were becoming. I looked at the faces on my bridge. The engineer, Kai, a man who once designed city-sized aquaponic farms, now monitored the warhead's temperature with a jeweler's focus. The communications officer, once a linguist who dreamt of translating alien poetry, now focused on jamming frequencies to ensure our crime went unseen until it was too late. We were the best of humanity. We were also the worst. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A lecture hall, years ago. Elias Vance at the podium, his eyes alight with passion. The genetic code is a sacred text, he had told a room full of eager students, including me. It is the story of life itself, written over billions of years. To edit it is to hold a conversation with God. To destroy it is a sin for which there is no name. Now he was about to commit that sin on a planetary scale, and I was the one who had to give the order. My hand tightened on the rostrum. This wasn't justice. I knew that. Justice was a word for courts and children's stories. This was something older, something uglier. This was reciprocity. An eye for an eye. A child for a child. All stations, report readiness. Petrova's voice cut through my thoughts. The clock on the screen read Giorgio 30 seconds. I looked at Xylos one last time, at its swirling blue oceans and verdant, living continents. A part of me, the scientist I used to be, screamed in protest. It was a library of unique life, a treasure beyond price. The Eris Thorn who now commanded the Vespertine silenced that voice with cold precision. That Oris was a ghost. She had died with the last human child that would never be born. Open the launch bay, I said. A low hum vibrated through the deck as the missile silo doors slid open. The warhead wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It was a single, sleek canister filled with the most virulent substance ever created, a promise of absolute desolation. Target is locked. Trajectory is confirmed, Elias reported, his voice tight. The clock hit 05, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deploy, I commanded. My voice did not shake. It was as sterile and cold as the silence that followed. On the screen, a single silver dart ejected from our belly, a tiny needle aimed at the heart of a living world. It descended gracefully, swallowed by the planet's brilliant blue atmosphere. For a moment, nothing happened. We all watched, holding our breath. Petrova brought up the bioscanner feed, a complex holographic map of the planet showing life signs as a shimmering, golden web. For a few agonizing minutes, the web held steady. Then, a single thread near the missile's impact point turned gray. Then another, and another. It wasn't an explosion. It was a stain. A patch of deadness that spread silently, inexorably, across the golden web. It moved like a disease. A creeping, silent wave of null life that devoured everything it touched. Forests, oceans. The course is strange. Beautiful children, all of it just ceasing. The light of life was being turned off, continent by continent. No one on the bridge spoke. No one cheered. There was no catharsis, no satisfaction. There was only the sick, hollow feeling of a line crossed, of a sin committed for which there truly was no name. We just watched the golden web disintegrate, watched a world die in utter silence. And then it came, a new sound. or rather, a new silence. It filled our minds, overwhelming the low hum of the ship's systems, the telepathic voice of the chorus. It wasn't the calm, paternalistic symphony we remembered. It wasn't a roar of anger or a threat of retaliation. It was a chorus of pure, unadulterated grief. It was the sound of a billion voices weeping in perfect, serene harmony. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I had ever heard. The sorrow was a physical force, a pressure against my skull that made my teeth ache. It was a clean, perfect pain, untainted by hatred. They were mourning their lost children, and their grief was so vast it threatened to drown us. On the bridge, my crew flinched. Petrova squeezed her eyes shut. Kai doubled over his console. Even Elias, the architect of this horror, looked pale and shaken. The sound was a judgment more absolute than any weapon. It did not condemn us. It did not threaten us. It simply reflected our monstrousness back at us in a perfect, harmonious chord of pain. As I ordered the Vespertine to turn and burn away from the dying world, leaving the ghost of Xylos in our wake, I knew two things with chilling certainty. We had shown them that humanity would not die quietly, and we had just started a war, not of extinction, but of damnation. We had won the first battle, and in doing so, we had lost our souls. The weeping symphony of the chorus followed us into the darkness, a promise of the horrors yet to come. The weeping symphony of the chorus did not fade. It lingered, a phantom limb of sound in the silence of our minds. We ran for 3 weeks, burning the ship's drive until the reactor core whined in protest, pushing deeper into the uncharted black where no starlight touched. But there was no running from a sound that was already inside you. It was the new silence, a constant low-frequency thrum of cosmic sorrow that vibrated behind our teeth and settled in the hollows of our bones. On the bridge of the Vespertine, the perfect, sterile silence had been replaced by this perfect, harmonious grief. No one spoke of it, but you could see its work in the slight tremor of a technician's hand, the way eyes would stare at a fixed point in the empty air for too long. We were all listening. We had become a ship of haunted men and women, crewed by the ghosts of our own future, now stalked by the ghosts of their present. Elias was the first to give it a name. He found me staring into the holographic tank, which was now just a swirling vortex of black, a perfect mirror of the void. "The lament," he said, his voice a dry rustle of paper. He looked older, the grim satisfaction he'd shown after Xylos leached away, replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. That's what they're doing. They're not attacking. They're not threatening. They're just broadcasting their pain, letting us feel exactly what we've done. He tapped a long, bony finger on a diagnostic screen showing our own brainwave patterns. It's beautiful, isn't it, as a weapon? They're trying to make us drown in their tears. It was working. Kai, our engineer, a man who could rebuild a fusion manifold blindfolded, had taken to talking to himself in the engine room, quiet, frantic whispers to someone who wasn't there. Petrova had stopped sleeping entirely, her station littered with empty caffeine bulbs, her eyes wide and raw as she reran the same atmospheric dispersal models over and over, as if she could somehow undo the math of our atrocity. My own dreams were filled with the sound, a choir that sang of falling leaves and fading light, the sweet, terrible sorrow of an ending. I had not slept more than an hour at a time since Xylos. The guilt I had used as my sword was now a poison, and their lament was the catalyst. It was a relief when the summons from command finally came. The quantum entanglement communicator chimed, a sound as sharp and unwelcome as a scalpel. A single, encrypted icon appeared in the center of the main screen. It was time to report our success. I gathered the senior staff on the bridge, what was left of them. Elias stood beside me, his arms crossed, a statue of intellectual defiance. Petrova stood at her console, refusing to turn and face the screen. "Secure the channel," I ordered. The icon shimmered and resolved into a face. But it wasn't a face. It was the sigil of the Directorate, a stylized human eye weeping a single star, the symbol of humanity's unified, vengeful will. The voice that spoke was synthesized, genderless, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Report Vespertine." I kept my own voice just as level, just as dead. "Mission accomplished. The Xylos nursery is neutralized. The unraveling phage performed above all projected parameters. The target world is biologically inert." There was a pause, perhaps a full second, as the Directorate processed this information. "Losses?" the voice asked. "Theirs or ours?" Elias muttered under his breath. I ignored him. "None to the Vespertine or its crew," I said. The chorus broadcast a telepathic signal post-deployment, a wave of emotional feedback. It has had a measurable psychological impact on the crew, but operational readiness is unaffected. A lie, but a necessary one. Acknowledged. The psychological weaponization of their hive mind was a calculated risk. The voice stated, "Your crew are the finest minds of our species. They will adapt, or they will be replaced." The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. We were not heroes. We were not even soldiers. We were a tool, and a tool could be resharpened or discarded. "Your success has been registered," the voice continued. The chorus has gone silent on all diplomatic channels. Their eleutherophage has ceased its palliative functions across our worlds. They are aware. They are wounded. Now, we will strike again. Before they can adapt their defenses, you have new orders, Captain Thorne. A data packet streamed across the screen, decrypting in real time. A new star system appeared in the holographic tank, and in its center, a world that glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. It looked like a pearl. "This is Ethel," the Directorate's voice explained. "Intelligence designates it as a repository. It is not a military world. It is not a nursery. It is a library, a museum." The chorus does not store data on crystals or drives. They weave it into the genetic structure of non-sentient, decorative life forms. The entire planet is a living archive of their billion-year history, their art, their philosophy. It is the heart of their culture, the memory of their species. Petrova finally turned, her face a mask of disbelief. "You want us to destroy it, to burn their history. Destruction is inefficient." The voice corrected her. "Your next payload is not the unraveling. It is codenamed Lethe." Dr. Vance's work. I looked at Elias. His face was unreadable. I remembered the long, feverish nights he had spent designing this new horror. Lethe wasn't a plague that killed. It was a retrovirus that targeted the specific genetic sequences used for memory storage in Ethel's flora and fauna. It didn't kill the archivists. It just wiped them blank. It turned a library into a world of beautiful, meaningless, empty things. They took our future, the synthesized voice said, a chilling echo of Elias's own words. We will take their past. We will leave them adrift, a species with no memory of who they are or what they have accomplished. We will give them the gift of oblivion, the same gift they tried to give us. The orders were clear. Total cultural erasure. Execute your mission, Vespertine, the voice commanded. For the children you will never have. The channel closed, leaving the sigil of the weeping eye hanging in the air for a moment before it faded, plunging the bridge back into the oppressive gloom. Petrova stared at me, her eyes pleading. Iris, we can't, It's beyond vengeance. This is vandalism on a cosmic scale. We would be destroying knowledge that doesn't just belong to them, but to the universe. The universe didn't seem to mind when they sterilized 12 billion of us. Elias countered, his voice sharp. There's a grim poetry to it. Don't you see, they made us a people with no future. We will make them a people with no past. A perfect trinus symmetrical act of war. This isn't war, Elias. It's intellectual nihilism. She shot back. It's a sin against the very idea of sentience. Enough, I said, my voice cutting through the argument like glass. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. We have our orders. Plot a course for Ethel. Dr. Vance. Prepare the Lethe payload. Petrova stared at me, her expression crumbling from defiance into a quiet, profound disappointment. She turned back to her console without another word, her shoulders slumped. The ghost of the scientist she once was had just been buried. As we moved through the void toward Ethel, the haunting began in earnest. The chorus's lament was no longer just a symphony of grief. It was changing, becoming more specific, more personal. They had learned from Xylos. They had realized that our collective guilt was a weapon, and now they were aiming it with surgical precision. It started with whispers at the edge of hearing, the faint sound of a name, a snatch of a half-forgotten song. Then came the scents. I was reviewing sensor logs in my quarters when I smelled jasmine, the perfume my wife, Ilara, used to wear. It was so vivid, so real, that I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, half expecting to see her standing there. But the room was empty. The scent faded, leaving only the sterile, recycled air and the gaping wound of her memory. Ilara had been one of the first to succumb to the despair, the name we gave the planetary epidemic of suicide that followed the revelation of our sterility. She hadn't left a note. She didn't need to. Her last words to me were, "What's the point of looking at the stars? Aris, if there's no one to show them to." The hauntings grew worse. Kai saw his daughter, the daughter he and his wife had been planning for, right down to her name. Maya flickering in the corridors, always just out of reach, a laughing phantom in a yellow dress. He would call out to her, his voice breaking, and then there would be nothing but the hum of the life support. Petrova began hearing music, a complex, soaring violin concerto that would drift from the vents in her lab. It was the piece her brother, a composer, had been working on when he walked into the ocean. She would sit for hours, listening, her face streaked with silent tears, as the ghost of his unfinished masterpiece played just for her. The Vespertine was no longer a warship. It had become a prison for our own ghosts. each one summoned and given form by the silent, weeping enemy we could not see and could not fight. Elias, ever the rationalist, tried to explain it away. "They're sifting through our minds," he'd said during one of our tense, silent meals, "isolating our strongest emotional memories, our grief, our loss, and projecting them back at us. A feedback loop of despair. It's ingenious, crude, but ingenious." But his explanation did nothing to stop his own hands from shaking when he thought no one was looking. I never asked him what he saw. We were all trapped in our own private hells. My command was fraying. The crew moved like zombies, their faces pale, their eyes ringed with darkness. Mistakes were becoming common misaligned power conduits, corrupted data files. The ship itself seemed to groan under the weight of our collective sorrow. I had to hold it together. I was the captain. Guilt was my qualification, and I would not let it be my undoing. I found Kai in the main engineering bay, standing before the swirling blue vortex of the reactor core. He was holding a small, worn teddy bear, one he had bought the week before the chorus arrived. His phantom daughter, Maya, was standing beside him, her small, translucent hand reaching for it. At least, that's what he was seeing. I saw only a broken man staring into the heart of a star, whispering to empty air. "She's so cold, Captain," he said, his voice a choked sob. He didn't look at me. "She says she's cold. I need to make her warm." He took a step toward the containment field, toward the lethal radiation of the core. "Kai, stand down," I ordered, my voice sharp. "That's not her. It's them. It's a trick." He shook his head, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "You don't understand. She's my daughter. A father has to protect his daughter." He was going to walk right into the reactor. The ship, and all of us, would die with him. I drew my sidearm, a standard issue kinetic pistol that felt impossibly heavy. It was a relic of a different kind of warfare. I couldn't shoot him. He was a victim, not a traitor. I couldn't let him kill us all. I did the only thing I could. I pistol whipped him, a sickening crack of metal against bone. He crumpled to the deck, unconscious, the teddy bear rolling from his grasp. The phantom of his daughter vanished. I stood over him, my breath ragged, the pistol feeling slick in my hand. One of my crew, one of humanity's best, lay bleeding at my feet, and I was the one who had put him there. The ghosts were winning. We limped on, a crippled ship of madmen, a few days out from Ethel. I had Kai sedated and confined to the medbay. The rest of the crew avoided my gaze. I was no longer just the captain who had ordered the death of a world. I was the captain who beat his own men into submission. We were unraveling, just like the creatures on Xylos. We had come to Ethel to erase a species' memory, and as the pearl-like planet grew in our viewports, I was gripped by a single, terrifying thought. We were doing it because we were desperate to erase our own. Ethel was beautiful in a way that hurt. As we slid from the black into its orbit, the world filled the main viewport, not with the chaotic blues and greens of a living planet like Xylos, but with a soft, shifting opalescence. It didn't reflect light so much as it seemed to breathe it. Veins of pale gold and soft lavender pulsed just beneath its crystalline surface, a slow, rhythmic beat like a sleeping heart. There was an audible hum that registered on our deep space sensors. Not sound in the conventional sense, but a resonance, a vibration that felt ancient and profoundly peaceful. It was the planet's memory, singing to itself in the dark. On the bridge, the brittle tension was a living thing. No one spoke. The chorus's lament had faded as we approached, replaced by this serene, resonant hum. And the change was somehow more unnerving. It was like a mourner falling silent to look you directly in the eye. Petrova was a statue at her station, her knuckles white where she gripped the console's edge. Elias stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the glowing pearl below, his face a mask of academic curiosity warring with something that looked like dread. The ghosts had not left us. They had simply changed their tactics. As the countdown to our optimal deployment window began, they returned with a vengeance, no longer content to whisper from the shadows. They walked among us. I saw her first, standing near the viewport, her form shimmering like a heat haze against the backdrop of Ethel. Elara, not the vibrant, laughing woman I had married, but the hollowed-out stranger she had become in the final weeks. Her eyes were empty. Her hospital gown hung loosely on her thin frame. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a vast, bottomless pity that was 1,000 times worse. Was this worth it? Eris, her voice whispered, not through the air, but directly into my mind, a cold drop of poison. Did you burn their children so you could feel better about losing ours? Does their silence make you feel less empty? I flinched, a sharp, involuntary jerk. She's not real, I said, my voice a harsh rasp that echoed in the tomb-like silence of the bridge. Petrova turned to look at me, her eyes wide with alarm. Captain. But the ghost of my wife smiled a sad, broken smile. I'm as real as your guilt, my love, and your guilt is the only thing keeping you alive. She faded, leaving me with a racing heart and the cold sweat of shame trickling down my spine. The attack was escalating, becoming a shared hallucination. Petrova gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as the phantom of her brother, soaking wet and pale, materialized beside her console, his lips blue as he soundlessly played an imaginary violin. On the tactical display, I saw a life sign flicker in the engine room and knew that Kai's phantom daughter had returned to her father's bedside in the medbay. The chorus was turning the Vespertine into a madhouse, a gallery of our most profound failures. Then they came for Elias. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. It wasn't a lost loved one that appeared before him. It was himself, a younger Elias Vance, filled with the fire and brilliance I remembered from my university days, stood before the old, broken man he had become. Look at you, the phantom said, his voice ringing with the passion and certainty that Elias had long since lost. The man who called the genetic code a sacred text. You've become a vandal of life's library. You're not writing a new chapter. You are just burning the pages to spite the author. Elias staggered back as if struck, his face ashen. It is a symmetrical act, he whispered, his voice trembling. A necessary response. Symmetry. You call this monstrosity poetry, the ghost of his younger self scoffed. You are a murderer of memory, a butcher of thought. You have committed a sin against the very light of consciousness. And for what? For a petty, childish revenge that changes nothing. You haven't saved our species. You've only damned its soul to your level. Be quiet, Elias hissed, clutching his head. Be quiet. Time to launch. Captain, Petrova said, her voice shaking as she stared at the ghost of her drowned brother. The countdown clock on the screen had reached 30 seconds. My own ghost stood beside me again, her pitying eyes burning into me. The symphony of our private hells was reaching its crescendo. Prepare to deploy the Lethe payload, I commanded. My voice strained. The launch bay doors hummed open. Elias, confirm the final dispersal sequence. Elias didn't move. He was locked in a silent, desperate battle with himself, his face contorted in agony. The phantom laughed, a sound of pure intellectual contempt. He can't do it. You see, the scientist in him, the man I used to be, is still screaming. Elias, I barked. Confirm the sequence. He began, his voice cracking. Petrova turned from her console, her face a mess of tears and defiance. Her brother's ghost faded as she found her resolve. No, she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with absolute finality. I will not be complicit in this. We are scientists. We are not. This. She reached for the abort sequence. Before I could react, Elias lunged forward. He shoved Petrova aside, his eyes wild with a fanatic's light. You are weak. You don't understand the poetry of it, he roared, his fingers flying across her console. They must be made to forget. We must make them as empty as we are. He slammed his palm down on the deployment key. The sin is mine, he screamed at the phantom of his past. Mine, on the screen. The silver canister of the lethal virus ejected from the Vespertine. A single tear of mercury falling toward the beautiful, innocent world below. It vanished into the opalescent clouds. For a long moment, the world of Ethel simply continued to hum its peaceful, resonant song. Then, the change began. It was not violent. There were no explosions, no spreading stain of gray. It was a fading, the soft, internal luminescence of the planet began to dim, as if a light switch were being slowly turned down. The veins of gold and lavender that pulsed beneath its surface flickered and went dark. And the hum. The ancient, resonant hum of a billion years of memory faltered, wavered, and then ceased. An absolute, profound silence fell, not just over the planet, but within our minds. The ghosts vanished. Ilara, Petrova's brother, Kai's daughter, Elias's younger self, they were all gone. The chorus's lament was gone. The silence they left behind was not peace. It was a vacuum. It was the silence of a library after every book has been burned. The silence of a mind that has been wiped clean. It was the sound of true and total victory, and it was the most horrifying sound I had ever known. We had done it. We had erased them. Petrova was on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. Elias stood over the console, panting, his face a horrifying mixture of triumph and despair. He had proven his ghost wrong, and in doing so, had become the monster it accused him of being. The rest of the crew just stared at the now dull, lifeless sphere that had once been Ethel, their faces blank with shock. Then the communicator chimed. The sigil of the directorate, the weeping eye, appeared on the screen. The synthesized voice spoke, and its tone was different now. There was something new in it, something that sounded like satisfaction. Report. Vespertine. I couldn't speak. Elias was the one who answered, his voice hollow. Ethel is quiet. Lethe deployment was successful. Their past is gone. We know. The voice said. We have been monitoring all telemetry, not just of the target, but of your vessel, of your crew. A chill, colder than the void, snaked down my spine. The chorus's psychological assault was more potent than our models predicted. The voice continued. The targeted memory-based hallucinations. Fascinating. Your crew's resilience, your ability to function under such extreme psychic trauma is commendable, especially yours, Captain Thorne, and yours. Dr. Vance, you have provided invaluable data. I stared at the sigil. Data? What are you talking about? Elias looked up, a dawning horror on his face. Phase 2 of the project is now authorized, the voice stated calmly. This was never just about reciprocity. Vengeance is a motivation, not a strategy. The goal has always been survival. The chorus developed a weapon that can turn a species' own biology against it. A subtle, elegant solution. We must develop the same capacity. The pieces clicked into place in my mind, each one a shard of ice in my gut. The hauntings, the targeted grief, our breakdown. We've been studying their methods through you, the voice explained, confirming my terror. We've been analyzing how they isolate and project memory, how they turn emotion into a weapon. We needed a test group, a set of isolated, highly intelligent, and psychologically vulnerable subjects to act as a psychic crucible. We needed to see how far a human mind could bend before it broke. You, Captain, and your crew were that test. The sterile silence on the bridge was shattered by Elias's choked gasp. We weren't a weapon system. We were the test subjects. The Vespertine wasn't a warship. It was a laboratory cage. Your mission is not over, the Directorate's voice concluded, its satisfaction now unmistakable. You are now to proceed to the designated rendezvous point. We are ready to begin our own experiments. We have learned so much from watching you suffer. Now, we will learn how to make others suffer in the same way. You are not the sword of vengeance anymore, Captain Thorne. You are the template for humanity's new soul. The apathetic, synthesized voice of the Directorate left a silence on the bridge that was deeper and colder than the void. We weren't a sword. We were a scalpel, used to carve open our own minds for their inspection. We were a template. The horror of that word settled on us like a shroud. To be the template for a new human soul meant our pain, our grief, our slow descent into madness wasn't a side effect of the war. It was the entire point. We were the raw material for humanity's future, and that future was a mirror of the chorus's quiet, psychological cruelty. Elias was the first to break the silence. He laughed. It wasn't the sound of mirth or even hysteria. It was a dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. The sound of a mind that had gone past the breaking point and found something terrible and hollow on the other side. Of course, he rasped, his eyes fixed on the blank, dead orb of Ethel. Of course, it's perfect. The ultimate act of scientific detachment. They turned us into a petri dish to culture a new strain of monster. We aren't avenging humanity. We are the weapon. Our suffering is the warhead. Petrova pushed herself up from the floor, her face streaked with grime and tears. Her expression hardened into a diamond-sharp point of fury. They used us. They watched us break down. They watched Kai lose his mind. They watched you. She trailed off, looking at me, her anger momentarily softening into something like pity. The ghost of Ilara might have been a phantom projected by the chorus, but the guilt was all mine, and the directorate had been taking notes. "What is this rendezvous point?" she demanded, turning her glare back to the empty screen where the sigil had been. "What are these experiments?" Before I could answer, a new icon flashed on the tactical display. It wasn't a directorate command. It was a proximity alert. A vessel had just dropped out of hyperspace a mere 1,000 kilometers off our port bow. It was small, sleek, and bore no transponder codes I recognized. It was utterly alien, but it wasn't a chorus vessel. Their ships were elegant, like spun starlight. This thing was sharp angles and dark, non-reflective plating. It looked like a shard of obsidian. "Unidentified contact," the tactical officer announced, his voice tight with alarm. "No registry, no IF. It's running silent, powering up weapon systems." We were a science vessel jury-rigged for genocide, not a warship. Our armor was minimal. Our conventional weapon systems were token gestures. We had one trick, the viral payload, and we had just used our last dose on Ethel. We were, for all intents and purposes, a dead ship floating next to our last crime scene. "Hail them!" I ordered, my mind racing. "Standard first contact protocols. Broadcast our registry on all frequencies." "No response, Captain." The communications officer replied, his fingers a blur across his console. "They're locking on to us. I'm reading multiple energy spikes. They're charging main weapons." On the main screen, the view shifted to show the silent, black ship. Ports slid open along its knife-edged hull, revealing the malevolent glow of energy cannons. "Brace for impact," I yelled. The Vespertine shuddered, a violent, metallic scream as the first volley of energy bolts slammed into our port side. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into the terrifying red glow of emergency lighting. Alarms blared, a cacophony of panicked noise. "Shields are gone," Petrova shouted over the din. "Hull breach on decks 4 and 5. We're losing atmosphere." The ship lurched again, throwing me against the command rostrum. The alien vessel was tearing us apart with cold, methodical efficiency. They weren't trying to disable us. They were executing us. "Elias!" I roared, pulling myself up. "Anything. Give me anything." Elias was staring at the readings from the alien ship, a strange feverish light in his eyes. "Fascinating," he breathed, oblivious to the chaos. "Their energy signature. It's not plasma. It's not particle-based. It's a focused gravimetric distortion. They're not shooting at us. They're literally tying space into a knot and throwing it at us." "Can you stop them?" Petrova screamed as another blast rocked the ship, sending a cascade of ceiling panels crashing to the floor. "Stop them, my dear Lena. One does not simply stop a new law of physics," he said, a manic grin spreading across his face. "One studies it. We are witnessing a paradigm shift in weapons technology. This was it. This was how it ended. Torn apart by an unknown enemy in the dark. Our mission a grotesque success. Our own command having marked us for a fate worse than death. The final, bitter irony. As another volley struck, tearing a gaping wound in our bow, a new voice cut through the alarms, speaking directly into our minds. But it wasn't the harmonious, weeping symphony of the chorus. This was a single voice, sharp and clear and cold as ice. "Cease your resistance. Template vessel. Your suffering is required But your destruction is not. The alien ship stopped firing. The bridge was a wreck. Smoke filled the air, tinged with the acrid smell of burnt electronics. Half the stations were dark. Through the crack in the main viewport, I could see the obsidian ship hanging in the void, silent and patient, its weapon ports still open, still glowing. What was that? Petrova whispered, her voice trembling. Who was that? Elias was the one who answered, his manic grin gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Them, he said, his voice barely a whisper as he pointed a shaking finger at his console. The voice. It originated from the Directorate rendezvous point. The rendezvous point. The location the Directorate had ordered us to, where our experiments were to begin. The alien ship wasn't a random encounter. It was an escort. It was here to collect us, to take the template to the lab. The voice spoke in our minds again. Its telepathic signal far more focused and invasive than the chorus's broadcast. It was like a needle sliding directly into the prefrontal cortex. We are the adjudicators. We have been contracted by your directorate to facilitate Phase 2. Your vessel is compromised. Prepare for boarding. Contracted. Petrova spat, her fear momentarily eclipsed by rage. Humanity hired aliens to hunt its own ships. It makes a twisted kind of sense, I said, the cold logic of it settling in my stomach like a block of ice. Who better to help us weaponize psychic trauma than a species that already uses telepathy as a tool of war? The adjudicators. The name itself was a threat. We weren't being rescued. We were being taken into custody. And our jailers were not human. A grinding, metallic shriek echoed through the hull as the adjudicator ship latched onto us with magnetic clamps. An airlock klaxon blared, signaling a forced breach. They're coming. The tactical officer stammered, his eyes wide with fear. They've breached the outer hull. I drew my kinetic pistol, the weight of it a pathetic, useless comfort. Seal the bridge, I ordered. Activate internal defenses. There are no internal defenses, Captain, Elias said with a hollow laugh. This was a science vessel. We have fire extinguishers and emergency medical kits. We were designed to save lives, not take them. The heavy, magnetic seals on the bridge door began to hiss as a plasma torch cut through them from the other side. My crew looked at me, their faces a mixture of terror and resignation. We had faced the quiet, soul-crushing grief of the chorus, the cold, manipulative cruelty of our own command. And now we faced the physical reality of our new partners. The door exploded inward in a shower of molten metal. Two figures stepped through the smoke and emergency lighting, and my breath caught in my throat. They were tall, impossibly thin, encased in segmented, dark gray armor that seemed to absorb the light around it. They wore no helmets, and their faces were a nightmare of evolutionary perfection. Smooth, pale skin, no visible nose or ears, just large, liquid black eyes that seemed to see right through us, into the messy, chaotic tangle of our thoughts. Their expression was one of complete and utter neutrality. The look a biologist might give a specimen before dissection. One of the adjudicators raised a slender, three-fingered hand, and the pistol was ripped from my grasp by an unseen force, clattering uselessly to the floor. The other one's gaze fell on Elias. Elias, who had dreamed of symmetrical poetry in genocide, who had designed the plagues that had silenced 2 worlds, met the adjudicator's black-eyed stare and began to scream. It was not a scream of fear or anger. It was a high, thin, keening wail of pure mental agony, as if his mind were being flayed, layer by layer. He clawed at his own face, his nails leaving bloody tracks on his cheeks, before he collapsed to the floor, convulsing, his screams dissolving into choked, animalistic sobs. The adjudicator had not moved. It had simply looked at him. The creator of the Lathe of Age, the voice in my head stated with cold, academic interest. His mind is a fascinating latticework of intellectual arrogance and profound self-loathing. A prime specimen. The other adjudicator turned its gaze on me. I braced for the same psychic assault, for the pain that had shattered Elias. But it did not come. Instead, an image flooded my mind, a memory that was not mine. I saw a world of towering, crystalline spires under a crimson sun. I saw beings of pure energy flowing through the streets like rivers of light. I felt a sense of peace, of unity, of a civilization so ancient and advanced that the chorus would seem like primitives. Then I saw the adjudicators arrive. I saw them walk through that world of light, their minds like black holes, absorbing, analyzing, and then, turning that piece back on itself, they weaponized harmony, turning it into a frequency that shattered the crystalline cities. They turned unity into a psychic virus that caused the light beings to devour one another. It was a memory of a genocide they had committed, and they were showing it to me as a resume. We understand the nature of your war. The adjudicator's voice echoed in the terrible silence of my mind. Your species wishes to learn our art, the art of turning a soul into a weapon. We have agreed to teach you, and your suffering. Captain Thorne will be our textbook. It looked from my horrified face to Petrova, who stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. It gestured with its slender hand. You will all come. The directorate is very eager to begin the lesson. We had been the judges, juries, and executioners for 2 worlds. Now, we had been adjudicated, and our sentence was just beginning. Our new prison was a place without a name, a directorate black site carved into the heart of a rogue asteroid, hidden in a dead-end nebula where the light of distant galaxies came to die. The adjudicators brought us here, ferrying the broken shell of the Vespertine like a conquered trophy. They herded us from our ruined bridge, the survivors of the crew moving like sheep, our minds still ringing with the echo of Elias's screams. He was taken away separately, still twitching and muttering about the poetry of empty spaces, his brilliant mind now a shattered ruin. We, the remaining templates, were escorted into the sterile, white heart of the station. It was less a prison and more a laboratory. We were assigned individual cells that were more like observation chambers. One wall a transparent sheet of what I assumed was diamond-hard crystal. On the other side, in the dim, clinical light of the observation deck, our own people watched us, human scientists, directorate officials, their faces betraying a mixture of clinical curiosity, pity, and a chilling, ambitious hunger. They were here to learn from us. The lessons began immediately. The adjudicators were masters of psychological warfare, and their methods were brutally efficient. There were no more ghosts, no more subtle hauntings. Their attacks were direct, invasive, and designed to strip away every layer of our identity. They would enter our minds while we slept, forcing us to relive our worst memories not as observers, but as active participants. I was forced to stand by Alara's bedside again and again, powerless, watching the light fade from her eyes. But this time, the adjudicators would add a new, horrific detail, a whisper in my ear, telling me it was my obsession with the stars that had killed her. Petrova was made to compose her brother's unfinished symphony, note by torturous note, only to have the final, soaring chord always remain just out of reach, a perpetual, maddening incompletion. They were vivisecting our souls. And on the other side of the crystal, directorate psychologists took meticulous notes, charting our neural responses, mapping the architecture of our despair. I could see them, whispering to each other, pointing at the readouts that displayed my spiking cortisol levels, my frantic REM patterns. They were building their new weapons from the fragments of our breaking minds. Day after agonizing day, we were subjected to these lessons. But as the weeks bled into one another, something unexpected happened. The human mind is a resilient thing. It can bend, it can fracture, but it can also scar over. We were becoming numb. The constant, targeted agony was losing its edge, becoming a dull, chronic ache. The adjudicator's art required the raw material of fresh grief, and ours was becoming old and worn. They noticed the change. The telepathic intrusions became less frequent. A new phase of the experiment was beginning. I was in my chamber, staring at my own haggard reflection in the crystal, when the door hissed open. One of the adjudicators stood there, its black, depthless eyes fixed on me. Beside it stood a human scientist, a woman with a severe haircut and the cold, detached eyes of a butcher. "He has requested you." The adjudicator's thought voice echoed in my head. They led me down a series of sterile corridors to a different kind of lab. In the center of the room, strapped to a diagnostic chair and wired with a horrifying array of neural probes, was Elias. He was impossibly thin, his head shaved, his skin pale and translucent. But his eyes were clear. The madness was gone. In its place was a terrifying, serene lucidity. "Aris," he said, his voice a faint, reedy whisper. "They told me you were proving resistant. I told them I could help." The female scientist, Dr. Malin, spoke. "Doctor, Vance has been collaborating with us. His unique insight into the theoretical framework of psychological warfare is unprecedented. He has helped the adjudicators refine their techniques." "Refines?" I asked, a cold dread washing over me. "What have you done, Elias?" He smiled, a faint, beatific smile. "I taught them the value of hope. Eris, their methods are crude. They use only pain as a lever, but the true art of breaking a mind lies in the careful application and withdrawal of hope. A man can endure endless pain if he has nothing to live for, but give him a glimmer of light, a reason to fight, and then snuff it out. That is how you create a wound that never heals." The adjudicator's voice slid into my mind, cold and approving. He is correct. His suffering has made him a master theorist. We are learning from him. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, looking from Elias's serene face to Malin's cold one. "We want you to lead," Malin said. The template program is moving to its final stage. We have learned all we can from passive observation. Now, we must test the practical application. We have built a new ship, the Absolution. It incorporates everything we've learned. Adjudicator psychic amplifiers. Viral deployment systems based on Dr. Vance's work. It is the perfect weapon. And you want me to command it? I asked. Incredulous. You want me to do it all again? Not exactly, Elias whispered, his eyes gleaming. This time, you won't be the template. You will be the artist, and your crew will be your former crewmates. My blood ran cold. They were going to put me in command of a ship designed for psychic warfare and make me use it on my own people, on Petrova, on Kai, on the others to see if I could break them as effectively as the adjudicators had broken us. It was the ultimate test. It was the final, monstrous act of betrayal. No, I said, the word a stone in my throat. I won't do it. Milan sighed, a sound of mild disappointment. The adjudicator simply tilted its head. Elias's smile widened. I thought you might say that, he said, which is why I designed a motivation for you. He nodded to Dr. Mellon. She touched a control panel, and a section of the wall behind Elias becomes transparent, revealing another chamber. In it, pale and sedated, but alive, was Alara, my wife, the ghost that had haunted me. The memory the chorus had used to torture me was real and breathing less than 10 feet away. I staggered back, my mind reeling. How she never took her own life. Eris, Elias explained gently. She was part of the despair, yes, but the Directorate has ways of preventing the loss of valuable assets. She has been in cryostasis since the early days, a potential leverage point, a source of profound, untapped grief for their most promising template. If you lead the Absolution, Malin said, her voice flat and businesslike, if you successfully break your former crew and prove that a human can wield these new weapons, Alara will be released to you. You can take her to a secluded colony world, live out the rest of your sterile, pointless lives in peace. It is a kindness, the same word the chorus had used. It was Elias's masterpiece of cruelty. He hadn't just given them a new way to torture us. He had given them the perfect lever to control me, to save the woman I loved. I had to become the monster they wanted me to be. I had to turn my back on the last vestiges of my crew, my loyalty, my soul, and become a weapon. Or I could refuse and condemn Alara to. What a permanent life as a lab specimen. I looked at her sleeping face, so peaceful, so unaware of the hell we were all living in. I looked at Elias, his eyes shining with the light of pure, abstract, intellectual evil. I looked at the impassive adjudicator, our teacher in the art of damnation. My choice was no choice at all. It was the final turn of the screw. A week later, I stood on the bridge of the Absolution. It was a perfect, silent machine, its systems humming with a power that felt obscene. On the main screen, Petrova's face stared back at me from the bridge of the captured Vespertine. Her eyes were filled with a defiant, wounded fury. Traitor, she spat. After everything we went through, you joined them. You became one of them. Behind me, on the observation deck, Dr. Malin and the adjudicator watched, their minds open, ready to record, to learn. Beside them, in a wheelchair, sat Elias, the proud architect of this final lesson. I met Petrova's gaze, my heart a cold, dead thing in my chest. I had made my bargain. I had sold my soul for a ghost. I'm sorry. Lena, I said, and my voice was not my own. It was a cold, synthesized echo, the voice of the directorate, the voice of the template that had been successfully forged. I gave the order. The psychic amplifier whined to life, and I reached into her mind, not with the blind rage of a weapon, but with the cold, precise art of a torturer. I found the memory of her brother, his unfinished symphony, and I began to unravel it, note by painful note, just as Elias had taught. The war for humanity's soul was over. The templates had graduated, and I, Aris Thorn, was the first of our new gods, our new monsters, a silent, weeping eye casting a long, dark shadow toward the stars.